Patriot interceptor stockpiles in Ukraine are running low, and Kyiv is now asking Elon Musk for permission to turn Starlink into a command network for long-range drone strikes against Russian missile launchers. Donald Trump is switching the Iran war from bombs to an economic blockade. NATO says it is ready to defend European allies against Iranian strike plans, and North Korea just fired about 10 missiles after Trump cut drills between the United States and South Korea. We start with the Starlink gamble. How do you hit a missile launcher when your own interceptors are running out? Ukraine's answer, as of today, is to ask the world's richest private citizen for permission to use his satellite network as a command layer for long-range drone strikes. According to The Independent, President Zelensky has urged Donald Trump and other American officials to facilitate Ukraine's access to Elon Musk Starlink so that Ukrainian drones can strike deep inside Russia, specifically the missile launchers Russia is using to bombard Ukrainian cities. The request comes as Ukrainian officials say their stocks of Patriot interceptors are dwindling under intensified Russian ballistic attacks, a detail also reported by a Reddit World News thread, citing Ukrainian defense sources. In other words, Kyiv is not asking for more missiles to defend itself. It is asking for the data link that would let its own drones hunt Russian launchers before they fire. What makes this different from yesterday is the actor. For months, Ukraine has struck Russian oil depots, airfields, and even targets around Moscow with domestically produced and Western-supplied drones. Today, the bottleneck is not the drone itself, but the network that controls it. Starlink terminals have kept Ukraine's military online since 2022, but using them to direct offensive strikes inside Russia raises legal, contractual, and geopolitical questions that SpaceX, the United States Commerce Department, and the Trump White House would have to answer. The Independent reports that Zelensky is pressing Trump directly, which turns a technical procurement issue into a high-level political decision. The request puts the Trump administration in a difficult position, because denying it could slow Ukraine's ability to suppress Russian launchers, while approving it could expose SpaceX to legal claims and Russian retaliation. Where this is happening is the overlap between Kyiv, Washington, and the battlefield stretching from Ukrainian cities to Russian launch sites. Who confirmed it? The Independent is the lead source, and the Reddit thread is corroboration that Ukrainian officials are exploring the option because Patriot interceptor stocks are low. What remains unverified is whether SpaceX has received a formal request, whether Musk himself is involved, and what the United States government will decide. We also do not know how many drones or which Russian missile systems would be linked first. Why it matters. This is a downstream effect of Russia's missile campaign. Because Ukraine's interceptor stockpiles are shrinking, every Russian ballistic salvo forces Kyiv to choose between protecting civilians today and saving interceptors for tomorrow. If Starlink can give drone operators real-time command and control deep inside Russia, Ukraine could shift from passive air defense to active suppression of launch sites. The downstream effects are significant. SpaceX could face pressure to clarify whether its network is a common carrier or a party to offensive operations. Russia could retaliate by targeting satellite ground stations or jamming constellations, and NATO allies may have to decide whether supporting such strikes violates their own export rules. This also tests whether a private United States company can be asked to enable offensive operations by a partner outside NATO. A precedent that would ripple through every future conflict that relies on commercial space services. The signal is just as important as the capability. By asking Musk instead of only asking Washington, Kyiv is highlighting that private infrastructure now sits at the center of modern war. What it signals in doctrine terms is a move toward distributed strike networks enabled by commercial space assets. Striking a Russian missile launcher with a drone linked by Starlink means the range ring for Ukrainian operations is no longer set by the drone's radio horizon, but by the satellite footprint. That puts more of Western and Central Russia within reach of a smaller, cheaper platform. It also suggests Ukraine is adapting faster than Russian air defense modernization, because the same cheap drones can now be directed from orbit, rather than from a vulnerable ground control station. The trajectory forks. Path 1. SpaceX or the United States government refuses, and Ukraine keeps striking with existing command links, accepting higher risk and lower bandwidth. Path 2, approval is granted, drone waves expand, and Russia responds either by intensifying strikes on Ukrainian power infrastructure or by developing measures against space assets. The clearest sign that distinguishes them is any public statement from SpaceX, the United States Commerce Department, or the White House clarifying Starlink's terms for offensive operations. And while Kyiv tries to turn a satellite network into a weapon, the White House is shifting the entire Iran war from bombs to bank accounts. Donald Trump is trying to win the Iran war with a banker's weapon instead of a bomber's. On Truth Social, the president announced what he called the most crushing economic operation ever against Iran, telling Tehran and any country that helps it that they will face tremendous economic consequences. The Guardian reports that Trump has pivoted toward crushing Iran's economy and isolating its trading partners after military strikes failed to bring Iranian leaders to the negotiating table. Al Jazeera and the BBC both frame the move as an economic D-Day, and CBS News quotes Vice President J.D. Vance saying the war has entered a new phase of economic pressure. Iran, for its part, dismisses the threat, with Iranian officials quoted by state media saying the campaign will fail. What happened is a policy shift, not just a sanctions expansion. The United States is threatening secondary sanctions on countries that buy Iranian oil, process Iranian payments, or otherwise keep Iran's economy alive. That puts China, India, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates in the crosshairs of treasury action because they are among Iran's largest trading partners. China has already rejected the threat, according to Al Jazeera and CNN, calling it economic coercion. The immediate result is that global energy and financial markets are being shaken, with the war's first visible damage being market stability rather than an Iranian facility. Where this is playing out is the Strait of Hormuz and the Asian oil market. Roughly 1/5 of global oil shipments pass through Hormuz, and any sustained threat to that corridor affects every major economy. The Guardian notes that Trump is tying the economic pressure to control of Hormuz, the choke point Iran has repeatedly threatened. The Guardian, Al Jazeera, the BBC, and CBS News all report the new campaign, and Trump's own Truth Social post is the primary source for the language. What is unverified is the exact list of countries that will be targeted first, the precise market reaction numbers, and whether Iran will answer by trying to close Hormuz or by accelerating attacks on Gulf shipping. Why it matters. The United States is signaling that it believes kinetic strikes have reached a point of diminishing returns. By switching to economic warfare, Washington is trying to force Iran's patrons to choose between access to the American financial system and cheap Iranian energy. The downstream effects are concrete. If buyers comply, Iranian oil exports could fall sharply, the rial could weaken further, and Tehran might be forced back to talks. If they refuse, the sanctions lose bite, oil prices stay elevated, and the United States may have to escalate militarily after all. Insurance premiums for tankers moving through Hormuz are already under pressure, and any incident in the Strait would ripple into LNG markets and European energy costs. The risk for Washington is that secondary sanctions could alienate partners it needs for a broader Iran strategy, including South Korea and Japan, at a moment when Asian allies are already questioning American reliability. Gulf states face their own dilemma, because they rely on American security guarantees but also on stable oil flows through Hormuz, and a prolonged crisis could push them toward quiet diplomacy with Tehran. What it signals is a doctrinal bet that Iran's economy is the center of gravity, not its nuclear sites or missile bases. It also signals that the Trump administration is willing to risk trade friction with China at a moment when relations between Washington and Beijing are already strained. The trajectory is binary. Path 1, major importers reduce Iranian purchases, the rial collapses, and Tehran returns to the table under duress. Path 2, Beijing, New Delhi, and others defy Washington. Hormuz remains tense, and the United States is left with either a hollow threat or a wider military option. The clearest sign is what China and India do in the next 2 weeks, not what they say. What changed from yesterday is the scale and public framing. Sanctions on Iran are not new, but threatening every trading partner with tremendous economic consequences. and branding it the most crushing economic operation ever is an escalation in rhetoric that matches the military escalation of the past month. What to watch next? Any formal Chinese or Indian response, movement in oil markets, and whether Iran makes a move in Hormuz before the sanctions take full effect. But Iran is not just answering Washington in the Gulf. It is now warning Europe, and NATO is responding. For months, the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran looked like a Middle East problem. Today, NATO made clear it does not see it that way. The alliance says it is prepared to defend allies amid reports that Iran is drawing up strike plans that could reach Europe, and Iranian officials are warning that Europe will not be immune from the consequences of any American or Israeli attack on Iran. Al Jazeera reports that the warning came from Iran's foreign minister, carried by the Tasnim news agency, and that a British airbase in Cyprus is the only European location struck by a drone since the conflict began in February. What happened is a public shift in NATO's posture. The alliance is no longer treating the Iran war as a distant contingency. It is treating it as a threat that could touch European territory. The British base at Akrotiri in Cyprus has already been hit once by a drone, according to the Al Jazeera report, which gives the warning a real reference point. Where this matters most is the eastern Mediterranean, where RAF Akrotiri, Allied naval traffic, and commercial aviation routes all sit within the range of Iranian drones and missiles fired from the Middle East. Al Jazeera is the lead source, citing a NATO readiness statement and the Tasnim report of the Iranian foreign minister's warning. We also do not know whether the drone that hit Cyprus was Iranian, Houthi, or operated by another Iranian proxy. Why it matters? This is the first time in the current war that NATO as an institution has publicly framed Iranian retaliation as a potential alliance problem. The downstream effects are practical. Air defense planning and radar coverage across southeastern Europe will come under review. The UK may have to harden Akrotiri. Insurance and aviation routing in the eastern Mediterranean will face higher risk premiums, and any attack on a NATO member's base could force an Article 4 consultation even if Article 5 is not triggered. If Iran can reach Cyprus, it can also reach other southern European bases used by American and British forces, including facilities in Italy and Greece, which means the threat is not limited to one island. NATO's standard toolkit includes enhanced air policing, integrated air and missile defense exercises, and forward positioning of Patriot or equivalent batteries, but the alliance has not said which measures are now active. The public NATO statement may also be aimed at deterring Iran by removing ambiguity about allied solidarity. The signal is that Iran is trying to deter American escalation by raising the price for Europe, and NATO is responding by making its readiness visible. The timing matters because NATO's southeastern flank is already hot. Romania, a NATO ally, has reported that Russian drone incursions into its airspace jumped exponentially this year, according to ABC News, so the alliance's air defense attention is being pulled in two directions at once. It also complicates Israeli calculations, because any European escalation could split Allied attention away from the Gulf and reduce the diplomatic room Israel has for further strikes. That makes any additional Iranian threat in the Mediterranean a real problem, not just a political one. What it signals in doctrine terms is an expansion of Iran's deterrent calculus. Tehran is saying that if the United States and Israel strike its territory, the response will not be limited to the Gulf. That raises the escalation ladder by one rung and tests alliance solidarity at a moment when NATO is already stretched by Ukraine and by Russian drone incursions into Romanian airspace. Path 1. NATO reinforces base defenses in Cyprus and elsewhere, Iran holds fire, and European targets remain theoretical. Path 2. A drone or missile incident against a European base triggers a coordinated alliance response and widens the war beyond the Middle East. What changed from yesterday is the speaker. Iranian threats against American bases in Europe had already appeared in the open source chatter, but today NATO itself said it is prepared to defend allies. That turns a bilateral United States-Iran issue into an alliance issue. What to watch next? Any NATO statement on reinforcements, any new drone activity near Cyprus, and whether European capitals begin issuing travel or aviation advisories for the region. And on the other side of Asia, a different American ally is learning that a gesture of restraint can be answered with a missile salvo. North Korea's answer, delivered within 24 hours, was about 10 short-range ballistic missiles fired toward the sea. The Guardian reports that South Korea's military detected the launches and that Japanese sensors also picked them up, while Defense News confirms the Trump order that scaled back the exercises a day earlier. Pyongyang, in other words, did not treat the drill cut as a gift, it treated it as a window. What happened is a standard North Korean weapons test with unusually sharp timing. About 10 short-range ballistic missiles flew toward the Sea of Japan, also known as the East Sea, in a sizable salvo. Where this lands is not just in the water off the Korean peninsula, but inside the alliance politics of Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. South Korea and Japan both tracked the missiles, which means the test was also a probe of Allied radar coverage and response coordination. Japan's detection is significant because it shows the trilateral information-sharing architecture is working, but it also means Tokyo will demand a firm American response rather than another concession. The Guardian, citing South Korean military statements and Japanese detection, is the lead source, and Defense News provides the context on the scaled-back drills. What is unverified is the exact missile type, whether any landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone, and whether the launch was ordered specifically because of the drill cut or was already scheduled. North Korean state media has not yet issued its usual statement, so the political messaging is still partly opaque. Why it matters. The test is a referendum on Trump's diplomatic gamble. If the United States reduces drills and North Korea keeps testing, South Korean and Japanese confidence in the American extended deterrent will erode. Seoul may ask for more bilateral exercises or closer trilateral intelligence sharing with Tokyo. Defense procurement timelines in the region will adjust, and China and Russia will read the episode as evidence that unilateral American concessions do not buy stability. China will likely use the episode to argue that American military pressure is the real address of North Korean tests, while Russia may see it as another sign of American alliance strain. The drill cut itself fits a broader Trump pattern of reducing forward-deployed exercises to cut costs and to woo adversaries, and the missile answer tests whether allies will accept that logic. The signal is that Kim Jong-un is not interested in a cheap deal. He is showing that sanctions, relief, or drill cuts alone will not slow his missile program, and he is reminding Washington that any future negotiation will have to come with a higher price. What it signals in doctrine terms is continuity, not change. North Korea is treating short-range ballistic missiles as both a technical testbed and a political signal. The ability to fire about 10 missiles in a single salvo demonstrates reload capacity and coordination, which matters in a conflict scenario where Allied bases in South Korea and Japan would face saturation. The launch also gives North Korean engineers data on salvo timing and dispersion, which is useful for overwhelming missile defenses. For South Korea, the test comes at a politically sensitive moment, with domestic debates over conscription, nuclear options, and the long-term American troop presence already putting pressure on the alliance. Path 1. Trump holds the course, offers more talks or further drill reductions, and the tests continue without a major crisis. Path 2. The launches trigger an American, South Korean, and Japanese military response, such as restored or expanded exercises, and North Korea answers with longer range or more provocative tests, possibly including an intercontinental ballistic missile or a nuclear event. The clearest sign that distinguishes them is whether the Pentagon reverses the drill cut or announces new trilateral maneuvers in the next week. What changed from yesterday is the response. Yesterday, the headline was Trump's order to scale back drills. Today, the headline is Pyongyang's missile salvo, which suggests the overture failed to change North Korean behavior. What to watch next? Any United States statement from the Pentagon or the White House, whether South Korea requests a restoration of full drills, and whether Japan raises the alert level for its Western defenses. In the next 24 hours, watch for 4 things. First, any response from Elon Musk, SpaceX, or the Trump administration to Ukraine's Starlink strike request. because that answer will shape whether commercial satellite networks become offensive command layers. Second, what China and India actually do on Iranian oil imports after Trump's economic threat, since their compliance or defiance will decide whether the sanctions bite. Third, any NATO reinforcement announcement around Cyprus or the Eastern Mediterranean, which would show the alliance is moving from words to posture. Fourth, whether the United States and South Korea restore any part of the scaled-back drills after North Korea's missile answer. If this brief helped you make sense of a fast-moving day, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel with the notification bell so you never miss a daily update. We read the sources so you do not have to guess what is real, and we track the fronts, the diplomacy, and the markets every day. We will be back tomorrow with fresh maps, sourced footage, and the next set of developments to watch. See you tomorrow.